Having said that, it's a really simple choice we face, along with every other local political subdivision in Pennsylvania this year, and that is, if you have savings, do you dip into it to avoid a tax increase or not? And my vote is to not, see where we are next year. And while we say that 80 or 86 or $90 is not a lot of money to our residents, I think it is. I think there are people within walking distance of this meeting room tonight who would find an additional $90 in taxes for 2011 a burden. We know, all of us know, families that have someone not working, sometimes for a considerable amount of time, or have children living back with them because they can't find employment, or even worse circumstances. So, you know, the cold calculation of $80 or $90 to make us more comfortable with the budget going forward is one thing, but I think it has a human impact that shouldn't be lost on us this evening as we take a vote. And while it may make us more comfortable with a conservative management going forward, and I agree it would, I think the statement it sends philosophically and the burden it places on some of our more stressed families in this town is not a good one. And for those reasons, I can't support scenario one with the 2 mil increase, but would prefer to avoid that increase for next year and use our savings and see how we're doing at the end of 2011. And if you're right, then we've had this discussion fully, openly, people understand it, and if the necessity is there in 2011, then I think people are understand it. But I just don't think we're there quite yet, and I really, really don't want to put that additional burden on our residents before we absolutely have to.
It was my discomfort with increasing taxes is the fact that we do have over $600,000 in a reserve fund that is really not designated for anything. And it's nice to have that cushion. It's we've always say, oh well, you know, it wasn't in the budget, but we could go into our reserve and pay for it, you know, and dip in and get that money out if we need it. That's fine. I've also watched that fund grow over the years, and that's nice too. But right now it's kind of hard for me to ask people to give us more money when we have that kind of money sitting around. And I know this isn't a very easy decision to make, but on the other hand, if you've seen the signs in the windows of the businesses down on State Street, I believe it's asking people to go into a locally owned business and spend $50 twice, and that would help the economy. I think there's the $100 that we're thinking about taxing residents in the borough, and I would like to see that money float around in the economy to keep the businesses alive down in the business district. So given a choice of saying, can you expand the coffers of the borough to make us feel a little bit more comfortable, or spend some money down on State Street to keep the businesses alive, I would probably want to go with the latter. Since we could put this decision off another year with the assumption that we probably are talking about a tax increase at the end of next year, if we could do that, I would want to do that. We're not talking about something that increases exponentially, that if we don't collect $86,000 more this year, that loss of money will increase at a rate more rapidly than that simple figure. That gives us a little bit of breathing room. It also allows us to spend next year to look very carefully at the sorts of services that we are providing in the borough, and are there ways to economize so that the scenarios that are proposed in these worksheets are not as accurate in a better way. So I would say that that would have to be one of our missions for next year, is to look very carefully at how we're doing things. We've already started that a little bit by engaging services of a resident of our town to start looking at ways to cut back on our lighting bill. We've been looking at grants to try to fund a lot of activities that might have to come from the general fund, and finding other ways to do things. Just this evening, deciding to use volunteers to sit and count pedestrians before we take out the ramp instead of having to spend money on professional fees when it's something that doesn't require a professional to do it. I think there are many ways that we can do this. So I am not comfortable with asking our residents to pay more taxes at this moment, but I do recognize that decision might not be so easy next year.
Just to clarify, scenario 1 doesn't expand the coffers of the borough. We're still reducing the fund by $200,000 with the tax increase. So it's not like we're looking to collect money so we can keep and maintain that $618,000.
Oh, well, truly that fund does
Yeah.
diminish, except that what happens is, you have to take the $200,000 out, if I understand this correctly, at the beginning of the year, because we need money to be able to operate until we receive our tax revenue. Then the tax revenue comes in, and basically you start the next year a little bit better off than you would have if you didn't have the tax increase. That's correct, right? So
Right.
you're in both scenarios, you're reducing the reserve to $400,000 plus or minus.
If you remember, the original scenario that Pat put forward in scenario 2 that we discussed was a $300,000
Right.
removal transfer from the operating reserve fund, and that would have been sort of a neutral kind of position. We'd be taking a lot more out this year, but starting next year about the same spot, basically. Still have to consider whether we'd have to have a $2 million increase to make up the difference next year. Well, and that scenario you wouldn't. Well, depends. So what this scenario and why I asked her to adjust that scenario was that I think 200 is the minimum to be able to utilize out of that fund to operate this year. Mm-hmm. So what you could, another way to think about it is that $86,000 could also come out of the operating reserve fund to start next year, which
So,
is the
yeah.
difference between the two
Right.
scenarios.
So you come out a little bit better at the end of the year in one scenario than the other, but
So
it's
there's-
not a point of no return at that point.
The net gain to the borough overall from a revenue standpoint, or from a revenue standpoint is scenario 1, because you get that $86,000, which is created, albeit out of people's pockets, but it's created and injected into the borough. So, I mean, I see both approaches as viable, and I think there's merits to both. So it is a difficult decision.
I don't think it's fair, I guess, for me to remain silent. I spoke, but I did speak at some length on the issue at the work session, realizing that there are quite a few more people in attendance here, and of course this is the meeting that's on television. But my comments were accurately reported in the 2 newspapers. I think the borough taxes are a tremendous bargain for our residents, and a very small portion of our total property tax burden. It's under 5%, I think, of what we pay. What we send to the tax collector in property taxes are actually borough rate taxes. And from a personal standpoint, I'd be happy to sign on to pay a couple more or a few more mills. But I'm not this year prepared to ask my neighbors to do it, particularly when we have an operating reserve fund to draw upon, and we can meet our budget for 2011. We can look ahead to 2012, see what the state of the economy actually is, see which of the half dozen or so